February 3rd, 1998, a security camera mounted outside a vacant business in downtown Los Angeles captures something its owners never anticipated. The footage is grainy, the resolution is poor, but what it records is unmistakable. A man approaches a woman in the pre-dawn darkness. They speak for several minutes. The conversation appears casual. Then, without warning, he forces her to the ground. What follows takes 20 minutes. When it ends, the man stands. He adjusts his clothing. He walks away. He does not run. He does not look back. His movement suggests someone who has done this before. The woman on the ground does not move. Her name was Paula Vance. She was 38 years old. She was homeless and mentally ill. She had come to Los Angeles from Alexandria, Virginia, though no one could say exactly when or why. Police would later discover that no family came forward to claim her body. No friends vouched for her existence. Only a short record of arrests for prostitution and petty crime confirmed she had lived at all. 5 security cameras captured portions of her final moments. Not one of them recorded the killer's face. The detective watched the footage repeatedly in the weeks that followed. He became convinced of something the evidence could not yet prove. This was not the first time this man had killed, and it would not be the last. He was right. By the time the killer was identified, he would be connected to 14 murders spanning 11 years. An innocent man would spend a decade in prison for crimes he did not commit, and the true story would reveal something more troubling than any single predator, an entire system that allowed vulnerable women to vanish without consequence. But this story does not begin in 1998. It does not begin with the grainy footage or the body behind the vacant business. It begins a decade earlier in a neighborhood that the rest of Los Angeles had learned to forget. To understand what happened along Figueroa Street, you must first understand what Figueroa Street had become. By the mid-1980s, South Los Angeles was in crisis. The aerospace and manufacturing jobs that had once sustained its working-class neighborhoods had vanished overseas. Unemployment in some areas exceeded 30%. The Bloods and the Crips, once small neighborhood gangs, had grown into organizations capable of controlling entire city blocks. Then came crack cocaine. Crack arrived in Los Angeles around 1984. It was cheap, it was potent, and it was profitable in ways that powder cocaine had never been. A dealer could buy a kilogram of powder for $40,000 and cook it into crack worth 3 times as much on the street. The economics were irresistible. Within 2 years, crack had reshaped entire neighborhoods. The effect on women was particularly devastating. Hundreds of addicts became what the streets called strawberries, women who traded sex for small rocks of crack. In earlier years, prostitutes had at least been offered some measure of protection by working in the area's cheap motels, where pimps or desk clerks might intervene if something went wrong. But addiction eliminated the buffer. Driven by desperation, many women began taking clients to abandoned houses, vacant lots, and dead-end alleys. These were the killing grounds. In 1984, Los Angeles police investigated 757 murders and more than 51,000 violent crimes. They did so with 2,000 fewer officers than the department would eventually employ. Veteran detective Sal LaBarbera, who worked the 77th Street Division in the mid-1980s, later recalled being dispatched to 5 homicide scenes in a single night. "It was triage," he said. "My partner and I were leapfrogging each other. We would process the crime scene and complete our reports in time to go to the next crime scene and do it all over again." In this environment, certain deaths simply did not command attention. When the body of a homeless woman or a known prostitute turned up in an alley, the case was often closed before it truly began. Evidence was collected, reports were filed, but the sustained investigative effort that a suburban housewife's murder would have triggered rarely materialized. This was the world into which Chester Dwayne Turner emerged, and it was perfectly suited to what he intended to do. Chester Turner was born on November 5th, 1966, in Warren, Arkansas, a town of fewer than 7,000 people in the southeastern corner of the state. His parents separated when he was 5 years old. His mother moved to Los Angeles, and Chester moved with her. He attended public schools in Los Angeles, eventually enrolling at Locke High School in the Watts neighborhood. He did not graduate. By his late teens, he had found work at a Domino's Pizza, first as a cook, then as a delivery driver. He lived with his mother on Century Boulevard, drank fortified wine, and made sporadic money selling crack on the side. There was little in his record to distinguish him from thousands of other young men in South Los Angeles at the time. He was arrested repeatedly throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Theft, drug possession, car theft, assault. He cycled through the county jail system, 1987 to 1989, 1989 to 1992, 1993 to 1995. Minor offenses, short sentences. The kind of criminal history that never rose to the level of serious investigation. He fathered 4 children with 4 different women. He maintained relationships of varying lengths, though former partners would later describe him as possessive and prone to violence. One woman said he raped her during their time together. His children were eventually raised by his mother after his arrest. When his mother moved to Utah in the early 1990s, Chester drifted. He moved between homeless shelters and missions. He sometimes found work as a security guard at the very shelters where he slept. He was a familiar presence on the streets of South Los Angeles, familiar enough that people in the neighborhood had given him a nickname. They called him Chester the Molester. It was meant as a joke. No one suspected him of murder. On March 9th, 1987, 2 motorists driving near the Harbor Freeway discovered a body in a roadway construction area at 10217 South Grand Avenue. The woman was partially nude. She had been strangled. She had been raped. Her name was Diane Johnson. She was 21 years old. Chester Turner was 20 at the time. He was working at Domino's Pizza. He lived within blocks of where her body was found. 3 months later, in June 1987, an 11-year-old boy named Alvin McThomas discovered the body of Alondra Joyce Bunn in a pile of trash near the intersection of 98th Street and Figueroa. She was 33 years old. An autopsy revealed that she had been beaten severely, battered, and bloody eyes, abrasions and lacerations on her head and neck, bruises across her torso. She had been strangled. In October of that same year, a passing motorist found Annette Ernest lying on the roadway near Grand Avenue and 106th Street. She was 26. She had been strangled. She was found partially nude, face down in the dirt, 3 blocks from where Diane Johnson had been discovered 7 months earlier. Annette's mother, Mildred White, was a retired nurse and seamstress. She had seen her daughter just days before the murder. She had called me, White later recalled. I said I was cooking turkey wings, gravy, and dressing. Annette never came. White ended up raising her daughter's children. White's friend Jerry Johnson Triplett tried to comfort her in the weeks that followed. 6 years later, Triplett's own daughter would become Chester Turner's 5th confirmed victim. The pattern was already established. The women were strangled. They were sexually assaulted. Their bodies were left in alleys, construction sites, vacant lots, the hidden spaces that lined the Figueroa corridor. They were all Black women. Most were homeless, addicted, or working as prostitutes. All of them had been rendered invisible by circumstance. And then, for reasons that remain unclear, the killing stopped. No murders have been connected to Chester Turner in 1988. He was in and out of jail during this period for minor offenses. Whether he was unable to kill or simply did not is impossible to know. The murders resumed in January 1989. Anita Fishman Breyer, 31 years old, was found partially nude outside a garage in an alley off Figueroa Street. Her body had decomposed badly before discovery. Children were the ones who found her. Her nephew would later describe her as upbeat, happy. Her sister Suzanne had been trying to help her through her struggle with addiction. In September 1989, the partially nude body of Regina Nadine Washington was discovered inside a garage off Figueroa Street. She was 27 years old. She had been strangled with an electrical cord. Regina Washington was 6 months pregnant. Her unborn child, later referred to in court documents as Baby Washington, died as a direct result of the mother's strangulation. Authorities would eventually rule the child's death a homicide and charge Turner with the murder. It was the first time California had prosecuted a fetal murder in connection with a serial killing. And the next 3 years saw no confirmed kills. Turner was incarcerated for much of this period, but when he emerged, the pattern continued. In November 1992, a custodian at the 97th Street Elementary School discovered the body of Deborah Williams at the bottom of a stairwell leading to the campus boiler room. She was 32 years old. 1 month later, in December 1992, an employee of the Figueroa Motel found Mary Edwards in a carport less than a quarter mile from the school. She was 41. In April 1993, the body of 29-year-old Andrea Triplett was discovered behind a vacant building on Figueroa Street. She was the daughter of Jerry Johnson Triplett, the same woman who had comforted Mildred White after Annette Ernest's murder 6 years earlier. Andrea was 5.5 months pregnant when she died. Under California law at the time, the fetus was not considered viable, and Turner was not charged with its murder. 1 month later, Desiree Ella Jones, 29, was found strangled in a backyard. Her brother Frank would later describe her as smart, outgoing, and funny. Before succumbing to addiction, she had worked at a rest home for the elderly. The bodies accumulated, the cases remained open. And then, in 1995, the Los Angeles Police Department arrested a suspect. David Allen Jones was a part-time janitor who worked at a school near where some of the bodies had been discovered. He was 28 years old. He was Black. He lived in the neighborhood. And he had an intellectual disability that placed his mental capacity at roughly that of an 8-year-old. In 1995, Jones was arrested for the murders of Deborah Williams, Mary Edwards, and a third woman named Tammy Christmas. The primary evidence against him was an eyewitness who claimed to have seen him with one of the victims shortly before her death, along with his general resemblance to composite sketches. Detectives questioned Jones without an attorney present. He was barely literate. Under interrogation, he admitted to using drugs with the victims in the areas where their bodies were found. Investigators took this as a confession. Civil rights attorney Constance Rice would later review the interrogation transcripts. Her assessment was blunt. This is nothing but detectives trying to put a fabricated story in the mind of a retarded man. You could have convinced him he was Spider-Man for the afternoon. Semen had been collected from the victims' bodies. Blood typing technology at the time showed that David Allen Jones was type O. The semen collected exhibited type A material. This alone should have excluded him. It did not. Jones was convicted in 1995. He was sentenced to 36 years to life. He would spend the next 9 years in prison for murders committed by Chester Turner. The conviction allowed the department to close the cases. It allowed the city to believe that justice had been served, and it allowed the real killer to continue. In the 3 years following Jones's conviction, Chester Turner killed at least 4 more women. On February 12, 1995, the same year David Allen Jones was convicted, a friend discovered the nude body of Natalie Joan Price next to a vacant residence in the Vermont Knolls neighborhood. She was 31 years old. She had been strangled. In November 1996, the body of Mildred Williams Beasley was found partially nude among bushes alongside the 110 freeway. She was 45 years old. She was from Michigan. She was married. She had a teenage son. Unlike many of Turner's other victims, she was not homeless or addicted. She had simply been in the wrong place. In February 1997, 30-year-old Cynthia Annette Johnson was found strangled in the Green Meadows neighborhood. Another suspect was arrested and unsuccessfully prosecuted. The LAPD labeled the case cleared. Then came February 1998 and Paula Vance, the murder captured on grainy surveillance video that would haunt the detectives watching. 2 months later, on April 6, 1998, Central Area Patrol officers were flagged down near Skid Row. Someone reported a body in a portable toilet at 500 Gladys Avenue. Officers found the partially nude body of 37-year-old Brenda Brees. She had been strangled. The portable toilet was located approximately 50 yards from the hotel where Chester Turner was living. In 11 years, Turner had murdered at least 14 women and 1 unborn child. He had lived within 30 blocks of every crime scene. Another man sat in prison for 3 of the murders, and then, abruptly, the killing appears to have stopped. 4 years passed. The Paula Vance case remained open. The footage from the security cameras remained unwatched in an evidence locker. The detective was transferred to the LAPD's newly formed cold case unit in 2001. He brought the Vance case with him. The images from that footage, the casual conversation, the sudden attack, the methodical calm of the killer afterward had stayed with him. It was our belief this wasn't his first time, he later said, and it wasn't his last. DNA evidence had been collected from Vance's body at the time of her murder. In 2001, the detective submitted it to the LAPD crime lab for testing. The resulting profile was uploaded to California's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, a database of genetic profiles from convicted felons. The system searched for a match. None was found. Then, on March 16, 2002, a 47-year-old homeless woman was sexually assaulted on Los Angeles Street between 6th and 7th Streets. The attack lasted approximately 2 hours. Afterward, the attacker threatened to kill her if she told the police. She told the police. The victim identified her attacker by name. She knew him from the Skid Row homeless shelter where he worked as a security guard. His name was Chester Turner. Turner pleaded no contest to rape. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. As part of his conviction, he was required to provide a DNA sample for inclusion in the CODIS database. On September 8, 2003, cold case detectives received a notification. The DNA recovered from Paula Vance had matched a known offender in the system. The match was Chester Turner. The notification also informed the detective in charge of a second match. Turner's DNA matched evidence from an unsolved 1996 murder. Mildred Beasley, the married woman from Michigan, found strangled beside the freeway. When detectives began examining Turner's background, they discovered something that few serial killers share. He had been repeatedly incarcerated during his killing years. His periods of freedom aligned precisely with the dates of the murders. His jail time explained the gaps. Over the following months, detectives submitted evidence from every unsolved strangulation murder in South Los Angeles that fit the pattern. Case after case came back positive. The DNA profile from Diane Johnson in 1987, from Alondra Bunn, from Annette Ernest, from Anita Fishman, Regina Washington, Andrea Triplett, Desiree Jones, Natalie Price, Brenda Breeze. Case after case after case came back to Chester Turner, prosecutor Robert Grace later said. Now, amazingly, stunningly, 11 murders have a murderer. Then the detectives did something unusual. They did not limit their analysis to unsolved cases. They also reviewed similar cases that had been marked closed. This is how they discovered David Allen Jones. The detectives requested that the remaining evidence from Jones's trial be tested using modern DNA analysis. The results were unambiguous. The semen collected from Deborah Williams and Mary Edwards matched Chester Turner. It excluded David Allen Jones. The evidence from the third murder, Tammy Christmas, had been destroyed after Jones's conviction. No DNA comparison was possible, but the signature nature of the crimes, the geographic proximity, and the timeline left little doubt. On March 4, 2004, David Allen Jones's convictions were vacated. The charges were dismissed. He walked out of prison after serving nearly 9 years for murders he did not commit. He later received $720,000 in compensation for his wrongful imprisonment. Chester Turner was arraigned on December 22, 2004 on 10 murder charges. He pleaded not guilty. By the time his trial began in April 2007, the evidence was overwhelming. DNA from Turner had been found on or inside 13 victims. The statistical probability of a random match, according to expert testimony, was as low as 1 in 6.725 quintillion for some samples. Prosecutor Robert Grace opened by framing the case within the context of its time. He described the world in which Turner had killed, the crack epidemic, the vanished jobs, the overwhelmed police department, the women whose deaths went unnoticed. It was a world, Grace told the jury, in which life itself is degraded. The defense strategy was limited. Turner's attorney acknowledged that his client had engaged in sexual activity with women in exchange for drugs. He acknowledged that DNA placed Turner at multiple crime scenes. He argued only that his presence did not prove he was the murderer. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On April 30th, 2007, they returned guilty verdicts on all 10 counts of first-degree murder, plus 1 count of second-degree murder for the death of baby Washington. During the sentencing phase, family members of the victims addressed the court. James Parham, whose mother was among the dead, said that Turner's execution would be getting off easy. Eljadine Rudolph, the sister of Regina Washington, spoke of the character assassination her sister had endured during the trial. The implication that because she was an addict or a prostitute, her murder mattered less. It was still no reason for her to be murdered, Rudolph said. Judge William Pounders delivered the sentence on July 11, 2007. He noted the overwhelming evidence that Turner had methodically located lone women and strangled each to death for his own sexual pleasure. He described the up-close and very personal nature of the strangulation as revealing a cruelty rarely seen in murder trials. Chester Turner was sentenced to death, but the case was not closed. In February 2011, Turner was charged with 4 additional murders: Alandra Bunn from 1987, Deborah Williams, and Mary Edwards from 1992, the 2 women for whose deaths David Allen Jones had been imprisoned, and Cynthia Annette Johnson from 1997. The Cynthia Johnson case emerged almost by accident. A department criminalist had inadvertently included evidence from her case for testing as part of the LAPD's effort to reduce its backlog of untested sexual assault kits. The DNA matched Turner. Turner was convicted of all 4 murders on June 19, 2014. 1 week later, on June 26th, he was sentenced to death a second time. As he was led from the courtroom, Turner turned to the prosecution table. He cursed at the prosecutors, then he looked at the judge. "I'll be back," he said. Gwendolyn Cameron, whose sister Cynthia Johnson was among the 4 victims, watched Turner being escorted away. "It's Judgment Day," she said. "He got what he had coming. The sooner they execute him, the better we'll all be." Prosecutor Beth Silverman was asked why the state had pursued the death penalty after previously offering Turner a plea deal of life without parole. "He's never taken responsibility for any of these crimes," she said. "So what are we going to do, give him 4 freebies? Those are 4 lives." Chester Turner remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison. California has not executed a prisoner since 2006, when courts halted the practice over concerns about the lethal injection protocol. More than 700 inmates await execution. Turner is among them. In November 2020, the California Supreme Court upheld Turner's death sentence for 14 murders. The court did, however, reverse his conviction for the murder of baby Washington, ruling that hearsay evidence about the fetus's viability had improperly influenced the jury. In June 2024, Turner was charged with yet another murder. Utah authorities linked him through DNA to the 1998 killing of Itisha Camp in Salt Lake City. Turner had fled to Utah in 1998, while on parole in California. Camp's body was found behind a business by 3 juveniles. She had been strangled. The case had remained unsolved for 26 years. Investigators believe Turner may have committed additional murders that remain unlinked. Police initially suspected he might be responsible for as many as 20 killings, though only 15 have been confirmed through DNA evidence. Chester Turner was not alone. The killings, initially attributed to a single predator dubbed the Southside Slayer, were eventually connected to at least 5 different serial killers operating in South Los Angeles during the 1980s and 1990s. More than 100 women died in this overlapping wave of violence. Louis Crane strangled 4 women between 1984 and 1987 before dying in prison at 31. Michael Hughes was convicted of killing 7 women, including a 15-year-old girl. Lonnie Franklin Jr., the Grim Sleeper, murdered at least 10 women between 1985 and 2007 before being identified through familial DNA matching. He died on death row in 2020. Samuel Little, convicted of 3 Los Angeles murders, would eventually confess to 93 killings nationwide, making him the most prolific serial killer in American history. All of them targeted the same population. All of them hunted in the same corridor. And for years, the pattern went unrecognized. Prosecutor Bobby Grace has reflected on why. "I think that some of the main themes of the case were the number of African American women that were killed during the time period and the backdrop of the crack epidemic that made LAPD, the African American community, and city government slow to react," he said. "Also, the fact that many of the women were prostitutes or exchanging sexual favors for crack made the murder somewhat surreal, as if it didn't matter because these women were not really part of society." Grace recalled hearing rumors about the killings when he was a student at UCLA in the late 1980s. The speculation at the time was that a single white man was responsible. "I remember being in school and hearing that it was one lone white man that was doing all these killings," he said. The Figueroa corridor looks different today. Some of the vacant lots have been developed. Some of the motels have been demolished. The crack epidemic has subsided, replaced by other drugs and other crises. But the fundamental dynamics that allowed Chester Turner to kill for 11 years have not disappeared. Homeless women still occupy the margins of American cities. Addiction still renders people invisible, and the deaths of those deemed unimportant still receive less attention than others. In the years since Turner's conviction, the LAPD has established dedicated cold case units and implemented protocols for cross-referencing unsolved homicides. DNA testing has become routine. The backlog of untested sexual assault kits that allowed Cynthia Johnson's case to go unsolved for a decade has been substantially reduced. These are improvements. They are not solutions. Chester Turner killed 14 women and 1 unborn child. He was able to do so because the system built to protect those women had failed long before he ever arrived. The jobs had vanished. The drugs had flooded in. The police were overwhelmed, and the victims belonged to a population that the city had learned not to see. Their names were Diane Johnson, Elandra Joyce Bunn, Annette Ernest, Anita Fishman Breyer, Regina Nadine Washington, Deborah Williams, Mary Edwards, Andrea Triplett, Desiree Ella Jones, Natalie Joan Price, Mildred Williams Beasley, Cynthia Annette Johnson, Paula Donald Vance, Brenda Bryce, and an unborn child called Baby Washington. They had mothers who mourned them. They had children who grew up without them. They had sisters and brothers and friends who remembered them as more than the circumstances of their deaths. Mildred White, the mother of Annette Ernest, raised her daughter's children after the murder. She watched the trial decades later. She listened to her daughter described as an addict, a prostitute, a victim of circumstance, and she remembered something different. She remembered the phone call before Annette disappeared. She remembered cooking turkey wings, gravy, and dressing. She remembered waiting for her daughter to arrive. "When I found out this happened to her," White said, "I went and got her children, and they have been here ever since."